Jamie, and welcome back to my channel, Jamie Sage Knits, where I talk about my own knitting projects as well as pattern inspiration. And today I have an example of the latter video for you all, which is the ultimate guide to slipovers and vests. So this is kind of a follow-up to a video I made back in the spring that a lot of people seem to like and find helpful, which was the ultimate guide to fingering weight tanks and tees. And that was a comprehensive guide to, as the name suggests, tank tops and t-shirts made with fingering weight yarn. And recently I've been feeling inspired to kind of delve into the vest and slipover patterns available, especially as we're getting into fall. And I think vests are such a great transitional piece, both in terms of like outfits and layering, but also in terms of making the switch from, if you're like me and during the summer are making like smaller, lighter weight items to the fall. There is something really satisfying about making a relatively like small garment in terms of the surface area, and going straight from that to sweaters I think can be a little bit like discouraging almost. I think there's something nice about vests as a transitional item that you don't have to deal with the sleeves. It is like more of a quick and satisfying project. And of course within that there is room for it to be more simple or a lot more complex and maybe not quite so quick in a sense. But I think there still is like that satisfaction and ease of having it be focused on the body, not needing to get stuck on sleeve island. And also I think there's something nice about how you can style it with outfits. It can be a little bit more versatile than sweaters because you can sometimes wear it alone or layer it with different items in order to change up the vibe. And also, I don't know if you guys relate to this, but sometimes for me I would feel a bit more comfortable going with like a bold pattern on a vest because it's a bit more contained, and then it can be balanced out with like a more neutral shirt underneath, whereas having a really bold sweater can be fun, but it's like a big statement, whereas having a bold vest can be kind of balanced out by other aspects of the outfit. So that's a little bit of context on my inspiration for this video. I really hope that you find it helpful, that you gain some inspiration for upcoming vest or slipover pattern ideas. And I would love if you let me know in the comments down below, do any of these patterns strike your fancy, or do you have a favorite vest or slipover pattern that I haven't included in this video? Because even though I have rounded up over 100 different patterns, obviously there are even more than that, many more than that out there. I was not able to include all of them. I just included a selection that I really enjoy and that span a variety of categories. So I'm gonna go in order from kind of fingering and sport weight, DK and worsted weight, and then Aran and bulky weight. And then within each of those yarn weights, I'm also going to talk through some more like stockinette projects, projects with all over ribbing or some sort of textural or lace component, cables, which is a really popular one for vests, and then colorwork. And I'll add chapters into the video, so if you're particularly interested in one of those types of projects, you're like, I really want to see what colorwork options are out there. Or if you're like, I have this DK or worsted weight yarn that I want to make a vest with, but I'm not sure what pattern I want to use, then you can skip ahead to the relevant parts of the video. Or if you want to just see everything that's out there, you can watch all the way through. I assume it'll be a long one, so settle in. And I hope that you enjoy and find it helpful. And I would love if you would like to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up in order to support my channel, and let me know that you enjoy this type of video and would like more. If there is another category of garments or patterns that you would like me to research and make an ultimate guide, please let me know in the comments below. At the moment, I'm not really sure what I would work on next. I'm thinking about maybe something relating to accessories, because that's not something I talk about as much on my channel, or maybe something relating to colorwork sweaters, because I do really love those. But nothing is set in stone, so feel free to let me know if you have any ideas. And, oh, sorry if you can hear that. There's a lot of background noise right now. I don't think I said, but I am located in New York City, so we often have background noises in the videos. All right, so also before we dive in, I can just quickly mention what I'm wearing right now. So this is one of my recently finished items. This is my adapted version of the Rumu Rumu tee by Yamagara. I'll stand up a little so you can see. It is this beautiful all over lace and I talked in my most recent podcast a bit more about how I adapted it. I knit this up in Murky Depths Yakima fingering in the color Lucia, and I think it is so beautiful, and I'm really enjoying it for fall because it's this lovely like eggplant color. So yeah, with that, let's dive in. For each of the patterns, I will share obviously the name, the designer. I will put a little, nope, on this side, I'll put a little infographic and you can pause at any point, take screenshots. I also am including in the description box a link to my Ravelry favorites where I've made a bundle that has all of these patterns in the order that I'll talk about them in the video. So you can feel free to go there. You can obviously save any of the patterns that strike your fancy into your own favorites. Or like I mentioned, you can take screenshots of the information that I share if that is up your alley. And I will share, what makes this pattern stand out to me amongst the hundreds or thousands of vest patterns out there. Why did I think it was a nice one to include in this video? And then I also will go through a few key logistical details. I'll talk through the finished bust measurements, the ease recommended, the weight of yarn recommended, and what needles, and then what gauge that achieves. And my hope with including all of that information is that you can know, first of all, if it fits something that you're already looking for, if it fits maybe some yarn that you already have in your stash, and also if it fits what you know that you like. So for example, if you really enjoy a certain gauge, you know that it creates a fabric that either gives the drapiness that you're looking for, or maybe like the density and warmth that you're looking for. My hope is that those details will really help you choose which patterns are the best fit for your needs. But within each category, I'm going to name the patterns just alphabetically because that is an easy way to go in order. I don't know what other order I'd go in. So starting with the fingering and sport weight category, just kind of more plain stockinette. So this is very like classic vests. The first one that I wanted to highlight is the Bergen vest by the designer Kinnicky Knits. And I thought this was a really fun like twist on a classic because it has this slouchy, almost like cowl style turtleneck. And in the sample photos, there's one where it's shown under a blazer, which I thought was really cute. So again, like I mentioned, I'm thinking, not only what does the vest itself look like, but how could we maybe style it in a few different ways? How could it be maybe a little more versatile than like a sweater, for instance? So something that gives that like particular benefit to a vest. So this one she shows styled over a t-shirt, but also under a blazer. So it can be like dressed up or dressed down. And it is knitted bottom up in the round. I will say personally, I'm not the hugest fan of knitting bottom up. I like to, when I can, knit top down in order to really personalize the length. But it's not the end of the world, and something you can do if you're knitting bottom up is to look at a project that you like the length, measure from the armpit down, and then make sure that you're splitting for the underarms at that length when you're knitting from the bottom up. So that ensures, even if you can't try it on and make sure you like the length, that you are achieving a torso or a body length that you'll be happy with. Keeping in mind, if you're measuring on a blocked item, just accounting for if it will grow a little bit with blocking or with wear. So this project has a finished bust of 31 to 55 inches with 1 to 3 inches of positive ease recommended. For this video, I'm trying to have certainly the majority of the patterns be size inclusive, but I will say I'm not only highlighting patterns that are fully size inclusive, which we would probably consider a range of like 30 to 62 inches. Some of the patterns fall a little bit short of that, and then I think a few of the patterns have like quite a limited range, and I just wanted to include them more so like for inspiration, or if I thought they had something really unique to offer. But for the most part, these patterns should be size inclusive or close to size inclusive. And this pattern recommends using a fingering weight yarn plus a lace weight like a mohair, or sport weight on 4mm needles. So I think that would create a nice slightly open gauge. The gauge that the pattern describes is 21 stitches by 31 rows. And when I'm talking about the gauge, I'm just going to use the numbers from now on. So I would say like 21 by 31. That means 21 stitches wide by 31 rows tall. The next pattern is a little bit more of like a just classic, simple but cropped vest. So this is the Hilda vest by Pernilla Inarsson. And I thought this one was so cute. It's like this little cropped round neck slipover. It has a split hem, at least how the pattern shows, and a pretty fitted appearance, and it is worked top down seamless, which is great. I will share construction details for each pattern when they are available. And something I want to note is for some of these patterns, I'll share if it's like 1x1 ribbing or 2x2 ribbing, or if it has a split hem, or if it's cropped, or these sorts of things. But something to keep in mind is, for the most part, you can adapt any of those details to fit your preferences, right? So if there is a split hem and you don't want it, just alter it. If there's not a split hem and you want to add a split hem, you can do that. And even if you're not quite sure how to do that, you can look up a tutorial online. If there's 1x1 ribbing but you prefer the look of 2x2 ribbing, you can make that adjustment and just make sure the number of stitches that you pick up will be divisible by 4. If you really like twisted ribbing and the pattern recommends 1x1 non-twisted, like, make that adjustment, right? I think it's so important to know, to explore what we like and then adapt patterns to our preferences. The point of a pattern is to support you in making something, but not to control and prevent you from making it tailored to your preferences. So that is something to keep in mind. I'll always share with these patterns like what the default is, but just keep in your mind, if you like the pattern but you don't like that it's 1x1 ribbed edging, you can change that. And the pattern should just be kind of inspiration and guideline to achieve approximately what the designer is offering. All right, so that ran over. So the Hilda vest includes a finished bust of 31.5 to 50 inches. And I don't believe the ease is noted, but from what I can see, it looks like neutral ease or maybe even a little bit of negative ease. The pattern calls for sport weight yarn on 3.5 millimeter needles, and the gauge is 22 by 36. So a little bit of a tighter gauge. This next one I think is quite classic in the front and then unique in the back. So this is the Juno vest by Yuka Tomiokoa, and the back is really what stood out to me about this pattern. It has this whole open kind of loop in the bottom, and there's ties that kind of give it a sense of structure and hold it closed. However, you can have those ties just in the back, or the pattern shows you can also wrap them around and use them almost as a belt to define the waist of the vest or the outfit. So I thought that was really cool. It is worked bottom up flat in one piece, and the finished bust ranges from 36 to 59 inches with 4 to 6 inches of positive ease recommended. It's worked with a fingering and a lace weight or a sport weight yarn on 3.5 millimeter needles with a gauge of 26 by 34. Next up, we have another one that's like stockinette but with a twist. So this is the Lily vest by Sari Nordland. I will say Sari Nordland is one of my favorite designers. I think she tends to make quite classic patterns, but often with a little bit of like fun interest, whether that's from lace or cables, or in this case from this little like peplum detail. So this is, I would say, a pretty feminine pattern that could be used across seasons depending on how you style it. So you could wear it alone in the spring or summer. You could wear it over a shirt underneath or with a cardigan on top to make it a little bit more fall or winter appropriate. And of course it has this cute ruffle at the bottom. It also has buttons or ties in the top front. And I think in particular in like a red or burgundy or forest green color, it could be really cute for the holidays, especially with those tie front details. It's worked top down, and it has I-cord edging for the neck and the armholes, which personally I really enjoy. I think it looks quite tailored, and to me it has maybe a little bit more of like a feminine, elegant finishing, whereas ribbing is a bit more of like a classic finishing that could be dressed up or down. And this pattern, the Lily vest, has a finished bust of 31.5 to 63 inches with neutral ease recommended, so a quite size inclusive pattern. It calls for sport weight yarn on 3 millimeter needles, and the gauge is 21 by 31. And with this pattern, as with many others, the fiber content that you choose could define how versatile the piece is. So if you choose something that maybe has like some cotton or linen content, that would make it more wearable across seasons. Or even if you choose something like a knitting for olive merino, I find that quite wearable even in pretty hot summer days. Whereas if you are going to use a more like woolly wool or something with like alpaca or mohair, something like that, that is going to lean definitely more towards like cold weather, and it's going to be a warmer garment. And so you can just keep that in mind for what purpose you are intending for the garment. Now we have our last kind of stockinette fingering or sport weight. I didn't want to include too many because I didn't want it to be redundant, but I tried to give like a nice variety of a couple of classics, a couple that have some interest. So this last one is called the Svala Vest by Anna Niemeyer. And this is a quite classic v-neck with a double knit button band. And this has, I think, just a very overall like classy appearance. I think it is a little bit long. Personally, if I were to make it, I would probably crop it a bit. So that's an example of the type of, adjustment that you could make. And this is, I don't know if the finished measurements were included, but it says it's to fit a bust of 31.5 to 51 inches with 3 to 5 inches of positive ease recommended. And it calls for a sport weight yarn on 3.75 millimeter needles with a gauge of 27.5 by 40. Now we're getting into some of the textured lace and ribbed fingering weight or sport weight patterns. The first one, I really love this one. Obviously there's over 100 patterns, but I'm gonna try to note when there's some that like really stood out to me and are maybe in like my top 10. And I would say this is one of them. This is the August Vest by Andrea Chang. And I thought it's so cute, really feminine, a v-neck with buttons. And it has these eyelet and garter texture details around the neck, armholes, and then the bottom of the body. It's worked top-down seamless. And I like that it is a light fabric. It could be worn in the summer as a shirt, or it could be layered as a transitional piece. And it, like she's made it in the sample of a yellow, which is, again, a quite, I would say, like summery color. But if you choose, a different color, that could also make it more kind of transitional. I could see myself making it maybe in like a beige or a gray, or like a bright color could be fun. I don't know. I just think this is like a really cute pattern, and I feel like it would be pretty versatile. So this fits a bust of 28 to 62 inches with neutral ease recommended, and it calls for a fingering weight on 3.5 millimeter needles with a 20 by 24 gauge. Next up, we have maybe another one that would be one of my favorites. This is the Brigitte pattern by Sofia Izagirre. And I love this fan lace and garter motif. It reminds me of the Barbro tank by Pernille Larsen that I made, but this is a very different fit and also obviously uses those stripes. I'm categorizing it as textured instead of color work because you could do this all in one color if you wanted. I think the sample looks very summery due to the stripes and the colors chosen, but depending on the color and fiber you use, I think it could be more neutral across seasons. And I could see myself doing it just in one color and having the texture really be the standout, or just using like a different, more autumnal set of colors if we wanted it to be like a vest. And this is worked bottom up in the round, which I think is, and that's the same for the Barbro tank. So I think there's maybe something about this fan lace that it needs to be worked bottom up to achieve this appearance. And the finished bust on this pattern ranges from 35.5 to 53 inches with a fingering weight yarn on 3 millimeter needles recommended to hit a gauge of 25 by 34. Next up we have the Himalaya Slipover by Selena Deering, and this is a turtleneck with all over 2x2 ribbing and double knit sleeve edges. I think it looks very classy and cozy. It could be kind of dressed up or dressed down. I could see this being like a work appropriate tank, even if you work in like a business casual setting. And this is worked top down in the round. The finished bust ranges from 37 to 54 inches with 3 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a sport weight yarn on 4 or 4.5 millimeter needles, and the gauge is 24 by 34. We have here another one that, and I think this is often the case for like fingering or sport weight yarns. This one is not a super wintry vest. It's something that you could probably wear in the summer as a shirt and then layer in the fall as a vest or a slipover. So this is the Oolong tank by Amy Scher. It is a v-neck with twisted rib edging and a lace motif that I find reminiscent of leaves going along the neckline and down the front. The back is plain. You could adapt it to include lace as well. But I really like how there's just kind of this like focal point around the front, and it is worked bottom up seamless. The finished bust ranges from 31 to 67 inches with 0 to 2 inches of positive ease recommended, so quite size inclusive, and it calls for a fingering weight on 3.5 millimeter needles with a 25 by 32 gauge. Next up, we have a very feminine, cutesy pattern. This is the Roselle vest by Rochelle Bardella, and I think it is, like I said, very feminine, very cute. It's this garter stitch vest with a sloped v-neck and a crochet scalloped border, and then this little tie in the front. So of course she's wearing it in the sample as a top, but I think for me, I'd probably be more comfortable wearing it as a vest, wearing it over a shirt or maybe over a dress. I think that would be really cute. It is worked top down seamless, and since it's worked flat in garter stitch, that means no purling, so that's nice. The sizes fit a bust of 27.5 to 49 inches, and it calls for a sport weight yarn on 4mm needles with 22 by 40 gauge. This next one, I love the way it's styled in the sample photos, and this is the Solstice Spencer by Mandy Julie, and it is a round neck, pretty high vest, pretty fitted, with all over stripes of lace and pearl columns, and it's worked bottom up flat and then seamed, which I think would give it a lot of structure, which might be helpful for the delicate lace. And I really, really love this one. I don't know if it's just the really cute way it's styled that's making me feel biased, but I do think this is maybe one of my favorites. The finished bust ranges from 32.5 to 48 inches with neutral ease recommended, and it calls for a sport weight on 3.5mm needles, and then you could also use like a light fingering and a mohair, and the gauge is 30 by 39. Next up we have the Vilu by Pufido, and I love this designer. I've test knitted for them before. I think they incorporate really interesting and unique elements of texture and are just very creative. So this one is, no exception to that. I think it's a beautiful layering piece. It has kind of a gentle v-neck with alternating vertical stripes of garter stitch, which is worked in a wool or merino, and then stockinette, which is worked in mohair. So that creates this cool, like, textured and sheer appearance. Like the mohair portions are more sheer, the merino portions are less sheer. So there's that element, but then there's also like the stripes and the texture. In order to achieve those like vertical stripes, it's worked sideways. So that's an interesting construction. And I just think this is like a really interesting and unique construction and appearance. The finished bust ranges from 36 to 59.5 inches with 1 to 4 inches of positive ease recommended. And it's worked with a fingering weight merino and a lace weight mohair separately on 3.5mm needles to create a pretty open gauge. The gauge called for is 26 by 40. Now we're moving into cable knit vests, and I have a few here for fingering weight, and then we have a bunch more later because it's a very popular motif for vests. First up is the Keelan vest by Enda Taylor, and this is a v-neck with honeycomb cable and v-shaped cables. It doesn't have the kind of common centered double decrease for a v-neck. Instead, it just has this overlap, which I think is an interesting change, and I don't know if any other patterns in this video have that or any other vest patterns I came across, so I thought that was kind of cool, and it is worked top down. That's nice. The finished bust ranges from 36 to 72 inches with 2 to 4 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a sport weight yarn on 3.5mm needles or whatever needles to hit the gauge of 24 by 36. Next we have a vest that I really like. I think is so pretty. It's the Coffee Cream Vest by Maria Tornero. It is v-neck, stripes of cables and stockinette, pretty fitted and cropped style. I think it's quite classic, but just really well executed, and I enjoy it a lot. I would consider definitely making this vest. The finished bust ranges from 31.5 to 67 inches with 0 to 4 inches of positive ease recommended, so a great range. And it calls for a sport weight on 4mm needles with a 24 by 32 gauge. Next up, we have such a classic one, and this is an example of the type of garment that, I mean this in the best way, looks like it could be store-bought. I think it can be so rewarding to make a really tailored and classic piece that looks like you could have bought it in a store, but actually you made it yourself. This is the Haru vest by Knits by Summer, and it has all over rope cables alternating orientation to create kind of a braided appearance, and it is a v-neck with these buttons. In the sample they've used toggles, which is really fun, and it has a double knit button band, which I think is a bit more of like a classy and polished appearance versus a ribbed button band, which certainly also can look quite nice, but I just think comparing the two, the ribbed looks a little bit more casual and the double knit looks a little bit more polished. This pattern has a finished bust of 42 to 60 inches with 7 to 9 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a fingering plus lace or sport weight on 4mm needles. And the gauge is 31 by 30. Here we have another Nordland pattern, and another one that could work across seasons depending how you style it. This is the Lalu v-neck top. I think this is so pretty. It has this really cool lace and cable motif down the front with kind of a small v-neck and small, like thin ribbed edges. The finished bust ranges from 35.5 to 67 inches, with 6 inches of positive ease recommended. It calls for a sport weight yarn on 3.25 millimeter needles with a 22 by 30 gauge. This pattern, I would say, is another one of my absolute favorites. This is another one that looks so polished. It looks like you could have bought it in a store, but in an amazing way. It's just very classic, very beautiful. This is the Milano vest by MJ Wilms. I've also test knitted for this designer, and I really enjoy her patterns. This is a beautiful, just classic stripes of 2x2 cables and stockinette with 1x1 ribbed edges. And again, you're seeing in the sample, it can be worn depending on what fiber you use, maybe as like a tank top, or it can be layered as a slipover or a vest. I just think this one is so gorgeous. The finished bust ranges from 30 to 62 inches with 0 to 2 inches of negative ease recommended for a tank style, or 0 to 4 inches of positive ease recommended for a layering piece. Calls for a sport weight yarn on 4 millimeter needles. I think you could also get away with like a light DK or maybe a light fingering plus mohair. And the gauge is 22.5 by 42. Here we have a very like intricate cable pattern, but also very repetitive. So this is the Moonlight Vest by Wen Chang Hua. And this is a beautiful all over lattice cables with twisted rib edging. I think it would be a labor of love, maybe something to chip away on over time. And you can see that the sample photo uses this gradient yarn. I believe that is like inherent to the yarn rather than like using different colors. It's just like an ombre yarn. And I think that's really cool. So that could be something you look for in yarn to use for this project. Or of course you could do, a single color and just have the lattice cables really be the standout. The finished bust ranges from 32 to 64.5 inches with 0 to 5 inches of positive ease recommended. It calls for a fingering weight on 3 millimeter needles with a gauge of 41 by 43. So that's kind of why I said I think this would be a labor of love. For myself, at least, I don't think it would be something that I could just work on indefinitely, and I think I would need to like intersperse it with other projects. All right, last cabled one for now. This is the Sign Vest by Nora Gone, and this is a beautiful complex cable. It is charted only, which for myself is fine. If you're someone who likes the instructions written out, this wouldn't be for you. To be honest, I think probably a lot of these would be charted only. I think that's pretty standard for cables and in some cases for color work. In any case, this I think is really cool. It's like a more intricate cable motif, and the armholes do have a bit of racer back shaping. So personally, if I were to make this, I would probably try to adapt that a bit or maybe add an armhole edging, just because I don't love how it cuts in a little bit extra at the arms. As you can see with this one, I like when it covers that part of my shoulder. But in any case, this is worked top down in the round, which we love. And the finished bust ranges from 32 to 62 inches with 0 to 2 inches of positive ease recommended. It's worked with sport weight yarn on 3.5 millimeter needles. I think you could use kind of a heavy fingering or fingering plus mohair, and the gauge is 26 by 36. Now we're moving into color work, and I think the fingering and sport weight color work is one of my favorite sections of this video. There's a fair amount of Fair Isle color work, but there's also some other stuff going on here as well. So personally, I love color work. I find it very engaging, and I do like it for fall and winter garments because at least with stranded color work, it creates a thicker fabric, which is quite warm and cozy. So first up, we have the Allendale by Mary Henderson. This is a V-neck button-up with stranded color work, and it is steeked, which is when you knit kind of the body as like a tube. You don't make armholes, but you have what's called steek bridges, which is when you just have plain, typically purl stitches, where you're carrying both or all colors of the stranded color work, and then you go back and reinforce the edges of that steek bridge, and then you cut it in order to create the armholes. And the benefit of that is you're able to knit the color work entirely in the round rather than having to knit flat back and forth, which can be more difficult. It can be rough for tension. It can be more tedious. It can mess with color dominance. So there's all these reasons that it might be more beneficial to use steek bridges and then cut afterwards rather than switching from knitting stranded color work in the round to flat. I found it very intimidating before I steeked, but now I've used it for 2 different projects and it's actually not so bad. So one of my missions on this channel is to make steeking feel less intimidating and more accessible to people. And it opens up a lot of really fun color work opportunities. The thing I'll say is for steeking projects, it is definitely easier to, or I would recommend using a kind of stickier yarn, so like a non-superwash yarn. Superwash I feel like is a little bit more slippery, doesn't stick together as well, and there would be at least a higher risk of fraying and slipping out from the steek bridge, but I have heard some examples of it going fine. So it's not like a hard set, like a steadfast rule, but just a recommendation. The button band is worked with a middle eyelet row, which adds some visual interest and also allows the buttons to be added anywhere versus a traditional button band where you have holes in set places. This pattern fits a bust of 29 to 60 inches and it's worked with fingering weight yarn on 2.75 to 3.25 millimeter needles. I'd assume 3.25 millimeter is for the body. Next up we have the Glenmora vest by Evelyn Siatra. This is another v-neck, bottom-up, stranded color work with floral and classic Fair Isle motifs, and it's actually worked flat, so that's interesting. The finished bust ranges from 33 to 64 inches with a fingering weight yarn on 3 millimeter needles, and the gauge is 29 by 32. Here we have a different type of color work. So this is the hashtag mosaic vest by Svetlana Pakamova, and this is a really cool mosaic color work, and it's available as a free download, but the sizing is very limited, quite limited. But since it's free, I wanted to include it. It's also a fun example of mosaic color work, but I do have several other examples of that. Something I noticed is it has very wide shoulders, so that's like a specific style or fit detail, and it does have this v-neck. The finished bust ranges from 45.5 to 53.5 inches with 7 to 11 inches of positive ease recommended, so that wouldn't fit too wide of a range of busts. It calls for a fingering weight on 3 millimeter needles with a 25 by 36 gauge. Next we have the Heartcore Slipover by Clara Eggers, which I think is so cutesy. It's a stranded color work with this heart motif with a round neck, knit bottom up in the round, and then flat for the upper front and back, so no steeking. And it has a finished bust of 32.5 to 58 inches with 0 to 4 inches of positive ease, and it calls for a sport weight yarn on 4 millimeter needles with a 26 by 27 gauge. I think this one is also a pretty cute pattern, but less explicitly cutesy than the previous one. So this is the Honeybee Vest by Joanna Mellon Skuladotir, and it has this honeycomb pattern, which is achieved, I think, through slipped stitches. It's like a lattice, or no, it's not. I think this is either achieved through slip stitches or it's a type of cable. I'm not quite sure, but I think it is so cute, and it gives a lot of different possibilities for color. You could even use the same color and it just would be a texture, or of course you can use 2 different colors to create that contrast. It has a round neck, a somewhat fitted style, and it's worked top down flat until joining in the round of the underarm. And the finished bust for this pattern ranges from 33.5 to 61 inches with 2 inches of positive ease recommended. It calls for a fingering plus a mohair or a sport weight or maybe a light DK on 4 millimeter needles with a 24 by 38 gauge. Here we have the Lara Vest by Hee-Jong Lee, and this I think is so pretty. This might be one of my top favorites. There's just something about it that I love. It's a stranded color work in a delicate diamond pattern with a v-neck and a really delicate thin button band as well with little buttons and pretty extended bottom ribbing. Of course you could adjust that if you wanted to make it more classic, like smaller ribbing. It has I-cord edging on the neckline, and it's worked bottom up in the round with steeking for the button band and armholes. The finished bust ranges from 34.5 to 51 inches, and it calls for a light fingering weight yarn on 3.5 millimeter needles with a 30 by 30 gauge. Here we have a really unique one. This is called the Old School Woven Vest by Nancy Marchant. And this vest is kind of crazy, but it's so cool. And I think it could be a great option for someone looking for a challenge. So the woven knitting requires knowledge of intarsia and stranded color work, and it's worked bottom up flat in panels and then seamed, and then the armhole and neckband ribbing is added. And I think it could be a good scrap yarn project as well. But of course you could also use like just two colors, one for the background, one for the woven, and just tailor it to your needs and your desires. The finished bust ranges from 36 to 57 inches with a lace weight held double, so equivalent to fingering weight, on 3.5 millimeter needles with a 26 by 36 gauge. We have a really cool kind of graphic color work with the Pop Knit vest by Dario Tubiana. It is intarsia. It's worked bottom up flat and seamed, which is pretty standard for intarsia. It's a v-neck and a pretty fitted style. The finished bust ranges from 32 to 56 inches. I don't believe a recommended ease is noted. And it is sport weight on 3.5 millimeter needles with a 21 by 32 gauge. Here we have one that I think is like somewhat well known. So I saw Louise, or Lou Dang It, knit this, and I think it is so cool. It's the Poppy Vest by Marianne Stevens, and there's so much going on in the best way. So there's this floral motif stranded color work with corrugated ribbed edges, and it's worked bottom up in the round with steeking. The finished bust ranges from 35 to 48 inches, and it calls for a fingering weight yarn on 3.25 millimeter needles for a 30 by 33 gauge. Here we have the Rinner Vest by Mary Jane Mucklestone. It is a beautiful floral motif stranded color work, round neck with 1x1 ribbed edging, and it's worked bottom up in the round with steeking for the armholes and neckline. The finished bust ranges from 27.5 to 64 inches with 2 inches of negative ease to 3 inches of positive ease recommended, depending on the desired fit and styling, so quite a wide range there. And it calls for fingering weight yarn on 3.25 millimeter needles with a 26 by 38 gauge. Here we have another Marianne Stevens pattern, the Sheep Meadow Waistcoat, which is a really cute detailed color work with a sheep motif as well as other Fair Isle motifs. It's a v-neck button up with, again, corrugated ribbed edging. I could see this being a really fun one for Rhinebeck or another like sheep and wool festival. And is also like a little bit of cottagecore, like light academia vibes to me. I just think it is so fun. The finished bust ranges from 33 to 49 inches, and it calls for a fingering weight yarn on 3.25 millimeter needles with a 32 by 34 gauge. Here we have another more classic pattern. This is the Sicily Slipover by Leah, or Kiss Kiss Rhinestones. It is a round neck, kind of classic slipover with some ideas for stripes, color blocking, and 1x1 or twisted ribbed edging. It's worked top down seamless. I do notice the armholes look a little bit deep in the sample photo, so if I were making this, I might try to adapt that, or I might just take that into account in how I style it. The finished bust ranges from 33.5 to 53 inches with 2 to 6 inches of positive ease recommended, and it is worked up with a sport weight yarn on 3.5 millimeter needles, or whatever needles to hit gauge of 22 by 34. This Stella Knit Slipover by Marina Storm is one that's mostly stockinette with some cool colorwork stripes and slip stitch floral motif, as well as contrasting ribbed edges. So it's a little bit more of a subdued color work option, and it is worked bottom up with a finished bust of 31.5 to 63 inches with 3 to 10 inches of positive ease recommended. There are fingering and DK weight versions available, and the gauge is 25 by 32 for the fingering weight version. Here we have another mosaic color work by Andrea Mowry, who I feel like does a lot of really cool mosaic color work patterns. This is the Tessellated Vest, and it creates kind of a small, like checkered or even like almost houndstooth pattern. It's a bit cropped with a round neck and thin ribbed edges. It's worked bottom up in the round, and the finished bust ranges from 32 to 64 inches with 2 to 6 inches of positive ease recommended. It calls for a sport weight yarn on 3.5 millimeter needles with a 26 by 38 gauge. This pattern, I feel like, I don't know why, but is another one of my favorites. This is the Unst Vest by Yu Ko. It's really cool stranded color work. I think it, from what I can tell, combines subtle striping with a bold diamond color work motif that kind of goes over the stripes in a sense, not like physically, but it's just present across the stripes. It has a small v-neck, and it's worked bottom up in the round and steeked. And I do feel like this has maybe a little bit more of like a masculine or androgynous look, but that might just be because of the colors chosen. I think with softer, more feminine colors, the vibe could change. And the finished bust here ranges from 35.5 to 62 inches, with 4 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a fingering weight on 3.25 millimeter needles to hit gauge of 32 by 34. This next one is a little bit similar in terms of like a very complex and slightly like dark color work. This is the Visla by Helena Rydberg. And I think it is a really cool colorwork motif. At first look, it appears kind of like lunar or witchy, but that might be just because of the colors chosen. And apparently it's inspired by the traditional Fair Isle Oxo pattern. It's knit bottom up in the round to the armholes and then flat, so no steeking. And it actually recommends backwards knitting rather than purling, and I've never learned backwards knitting. I'd be open to it, so that's kind of interesting. And the finished bust ranges from 28 to 61.5 inches with 2.5 inches of positive ease recommended. It calls for a sport weight on 3.5 millimeter needles, and the gauge is just listed as 25 stitches, no row gauge included. And then the last vest in this category is called 119 Bench Street by Joyce Johnston. And this is, again, a really cool and interesting all-over stranded color work. It looks kind of nature-inspired without a specific plant or animal motif. It almost reminds me of like fire or like waves. It's worked bottom up in the round, and it has a v-neck, kind of shallow v-neck with 1x1 ribbed edges. The finished bust ranges from 34.5 to 60 inches, and it is a fingering weight on 3.25 millimeter needles to hit gauge of 31 by 35. Now we are getting into the DK and worsted weight category, and again we are going to start with kind of like plain stockinette patterns. We have a few really nice options here. So this is the Annie vest by the Knit Pearl Girl. It's designed with fastenings at the back. You could possibly adjust it to make it reversible, but it has sloped shoulders, so would not be reversible at baseline. And you can choose between ties and buttons and cropped or full length, which I think is really cute. The finished bust ranges from 34 to 61 inches, with 2 to 4 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a DK weight on 4 millimeter needles with a 22 by 30 gauge. Next up, we have the Clematis vest, which I feel like is a pretty well-known one, but is so cute I had to include it. It's by Emma Meyer, and it is quite simple, but with that fun twist of the diagonal, pretty delicate button band. And the finished bust ranges from 30 to 58 inches with 2 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a DK weight or a fingering plus mohair on 4 millimeter needles with a 21 by 34 gauge. We have the J top by Alethea Handmade. It's, I think, just a gorgeous, simple top. It has quite long armholes to give a relaxed vibe. I also feel like this could be a great base to add stripes or a colorwork motif of your choosing, and it's worked top down. The finished bust ranges from 29 to 60 inches with neutral ease recommended, a DK weight yarn on 4 millimeter needles, and 21 by 28 gauge. Here we have another button-up version. This is the Joni Slipover by Cécile Fombert, and it is a pretty classic v-neck with a delicate thin button band, some cool shaping around the bottom front, and it's worked in 3 panels flat and then seamed. The bust ranges from 33 to 46 inches, so a little bit limited, 2 to 3 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a sport weight plus lace or a DK weight on 3.5 millimeter needles for a 24 by 32 gauge. So my sense is this would be a little bit of a denser fabric, a little bit warmer. Here we have the Maggie vest by another one by Stockinette. So this is a very classic fitted round neck vest with buttons down the front. It has a 1x1 ribbed button band and edges, and it's knit top down with a European shoulder seam. The finished bust ranges from 35.5 to 61.5 inches with 2 inches positive ease recommended, and it calls for a DK weight or a fingering plus mohair on 3.5 millimeter needles for a 23 by 32 gauge. This next one is another one of my absolute favorites. I just think it's so simple but really cool, and I don't know if it fits in my personal style, but I'm going to think about it. I'm going to think about how I would style this and potentially add it to my queue. This is the Obsidian Slipover by Sophia Scottford. It's a slightly open gauge for a drapey fabric, and it has this really cute tie at the top of the front, which is simple but quite unique. Like, I didn't really see any other patterns that had that exact detail. And the finished bust ranges from 36 to 50.5 inches with 4 inches positive ease recommended. And it's worked with a sport plus lace weight or a light worsted on 5mm needles for that open gauge, and it recommends a gauge of 19 by 28 inches. Next we have the Paul Vest by Marika Knit. This is a really classic, beautiful, simple vest with a v-neck, double knit button band, kind of oversized fit, and it could be styled in a lot of different ways to make it a bit more casual or a bit more like formal, polished. It fits a bust of 31.5 to 51 inches with 4 inches positive ease, and it calls for a DK or sport plus lace weight with a 23 by 32 gauge. A kind of similar one, the Petson Vest by Lotta Lothgren. This is worked top down with the front in stockinette and the back in reverse stockinette. So while the front is kind of similar to some other ones we've seen, like the Paul Vest and the Joni Slipover, that back is just an interesting detail that adds a bit of like textural interest. And you can do a classic design or a more creative, like scrappy version. And there's buttons down the front. The finished bust ranges from 33 to 64.5 inches with 1 to 4 inches positive ease recommended. Calls for a DK weight on 5mm needles, so a somewhat open gauge of 16 by 23. Here we have the PhD Vest by Juliette Limousin, and this is, I think, a very classic pattern with a small v-neck, slightly oversized vest. It's very, like, academia, as the name suggests. And there is somewhat long 1x1 ribbed edges. Of course, you can adjust that if you want to, but I think it just adds to that nice classic academic look. The finished bust ranges from 36.5 to 67 inches with 7 to 11 inches of positive ease recommended, so quite oversized. DK weight on 4.5mm needles for a gauge of 19 by 30. Next up, we have a couple more kind of like bow tie features. This one is the Side Bow Slipover by Sarah Antipenkoff. It is, I think, super cute. It's simple yet feminine, stockinette body, knit top down flat with double knit edging and side bows, so it looks very polished, a little cutesy. The finished bust ranges from 32 to 64 inches with 4 inches positive ease recommended, so pretty inclusive. And it calls for a worsted weight yarn on 4.5mm needles for a gauge of 20 by 30. Next up, we have the Celine Vest by Marika Knit again. I think this one's so cute. It's simple and feminine. It has this tie front with double knit edges on the neckband and front, and then ribbed armholes and hem. And it has a finished bust that's a little bit limited. It only ranges from 40 to 53 inches, with 2 to 6 inches of positive ease recommended. Calls for a DK plus lace or worsted weight on 4.5mm needles for a gauge of 20 by 28. And then the last vest in this section, the Stockholm Slipover V-neck by Petite Knit. This is a very classic fitted V-neck. Something that stood out to me is the loose gauge, which would lead to a very light and drapey fabric, probably a nice transitional piece rather than something super dense and cozy. It's worked top down with a slanting shoulder construction, and the finished bust ranges from 35 to 61 inches with 2 inches positive ease recommended. Calls for a fingering plus mohair on 4.5mm needles. But I included it in the DK and worsted section because of that larger needle size and the gauge, which is 19 by 27. Now we're heading into the ribbing, texture, lace section of the DK and worsted weight vests. The first one here that I want to talk about is the Basket Weave Vest by Studio Clara. I really like this one as well. It's a checkered kind of basket weave pattern created with squares of knits and pearls. So it creates this really interesting appearance without too much effort. There's no interlock, there's no like cable knitting as far as I can tell from the description. And the photos, it just looks like knits and pearls. And it has a round neck, twisted rib edging, and it's worked top down in the round. So this seems like a really nice project. I like how it is in some ways simple, but there's also like a fair amount of visual interest, and I think it looks really cool. The finished bust ranges from 34 to 58 inches with 6 to 8 inches of positive ease recommended. And it's worked with a worsted weight yarn on 5mm needles Often I would say with textured knits like this, it can be better for the stitch definition to use, as the pattern suggests, like a single worsted weight yarn rather than using a DK plus a mohair. That mohair halo can sometimes blur the stitch definition and make the textured pattern look less distinct. If that's something you're interested in, you can lean into that, but I think for this one we really want to let the texture shine, and therefore we would want to use like a wool, maybe even a bit more of like a structured wool that could really let that stitch definition come through. And the gauge of this pattern is 18 by 28. Here we have the Dion Slipover by Sarah Otteson. And this is a round neck, somewhat fitted slipover with this all over diamond texture. It, in my mind, evokes like a 3D cube effect. It reminds me a little bit of the artist MC Escher, who does a lot of like optical illusion type art. And this one, it's a little simpler than like his art, but I think it's really cool, and it evokes that almost like optical illusion 3-dimensional appearance in my mind. This one is worked bottom up, which is not my favorite, but that's okay. And it's a free download, which is cool. The finished bust ranges from 33.5 to 61 inches with 0 to 2 inches of positive ease, so pretty decent size inclusivity there. And it's worked with a worsted weight on 4mm needles with a 20 by 30 gauge, so a little bit denser than some of the other ones we've been talking about. Now we have a couple of quite similar patterns, both pretty classic, by Petite Knit, the Friday Slipover and the Friday Slipover V-neck. So for the Friday Slipover classic version, it's a round neck worked in broken rib. There's these nice shaping details around the neck and the armholes, and it's worked top down in the round. Whereas the Friday Slipover V-neck obviously has a V-neck. This one also has an all-over broken rib stitch to add a subtle texture. One of the sample photos uses a darker mohair in the body to create a kind of subtle contrast with the ribbed edges, which are worked with the mohair and the wool in the same color. So I really like that. And this one is also worked top down in the round. Both of these patterns have a finished bust of 36 to 61 inches with 2 inches of positive ease recommended. Both can be worked with fingering plus lace weight or a DK weight on 4mm needles, and both have a gauge of 22 by 34. So it really just is a question of if you prefer the scoop neck or the V-neck and how you would see yourself styling it. Here we have another really interesting textured vest. This is the Gloria vest by Dorothy Officiers, and it comes in V-neck or O-neck options. There is this all-over texture using a small quilted cross stitch, and it's worked flat with twisted rib edging details, as well as twisted rib details down the sides, and it has a split hem in the pattern. Of course, you can decide not to do that if you don't want to. I thought this was a really unique and engaging stitch pattern. The finished bust ranges from 34 to 65 inches with 3 to 5 inches of positive ease. Great size range there. It's recommended to use a worsted weight yarn on 5mm needles for a gauge of 22 by 23. And the pattern recommends a cotton merino blend that might contribute to the structure, the drape, and also make it potentially wearable across seasons. Here we have another Petite Knit pattern. Like I said, there's a lot of great options from her. This is the Ingrid Slipover. It has really fun horizontal stripes of different ribbing and texture motifs with options for a turtleneck or a round folded collar, and it's worked top down in the round. If you watch my podcast, you know I have been working on the sweater version of this, and it's really fun, and I love the texture motifs, so I think making a slipover version could be great if you're someone who enjoys slipovers, and if you want the effect of this without having to do the sleeves, basically. So the finished bust ranges from 41 to 66 inches with around 8 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a DK plus lace weight or a worsted weight yarn on 4mm needles for a 20 by 30 gauge. Here we have The Last Word by Thea Coleman. So this is an all-over, mostly ribbed vest with some lace and texture motifs within stockinette stripes, and to me it looks a little bit like leaves. I don't know if that's just in my brain, but I think this is a really interesting and unique pattern that is certainly, it's like an interesting way to combine ribbing and a bit of lace or eyelet details. It is worked bottom up in the round and with a V-neck. The finished bust ranges from 36 to 68 inches with 3 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a worsted weight yarn on 4.5 millimeter needles with an 18 by 24 gauge. I do think this is one where if you're thoughtful about your fiber choice, you could wear it as a tank top in warmer weather and then as a layering piece in cooler weather. So here we have the Mika vest by Kavita Raman, and this is a top-down v-neck with all-over texture. It's worked flat with buttons and double knit button band and edging, and I just thought this one was really cute. And again, this is probably one that you might lean more towards like layering, and I just think it could be styled in some really cool ways. The finished bust ranges from 33 to 65 inches with 1 to 3 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a worsted weight on 4.5 millimeter needles with a 19 by 19 gauge. Next up, we have the Poema Slipover by Camille K. This is a pretty feminine design with kind of a flowy fit, these little ruffle sleeve caps, and then eyelet and bauble details on the lower portion of the body. The sides are very open, so I think it'd be quite breathable, and it's knitted flat bottom up with a free pattern. And what I really like about this one is, like I said, it is quite feminine. I think if I were to make it, I probably would exclude the ruffles, but I do like the kind of baubles, the texture, the eyelets. And I do like how it's a bit unique with the open sides. And again, that makes it a nice option for layering, for working across seasons, so it's pretty versatile. The finished bust for this pattern ranges from 36 to 55 inches, with 2 to 5 inches of positive ease recommended. It calls for a worsted weight on 5.5 millimeter needles with a 17 by 25 gauge, so a relatively open gauge. And next up we have the Celine vest, which I actually have talked about in a previous video just because I really like this pattern. I think it's super cool and I wanted to include it here as it is a vest. So the Celine vest by Emma Mayer is a round neck with actually a rolled neck rather than like ribbing or being sewn down. And it's just this really cool checkered texture that's achieved, again, with just knits and purls. There's twisted rib edging on the armholes and the hem, and the finished bust ranges from 30 to 58 inches with 1 to 2 inches of positive ease recommended. It calls for a DK weight, and the gauge is 20 by 32. And I think maybe just one more from Petite Knit, the Sile Slipover. This is one of her older patterns. I've never heard anyone talk about it. There are a fair number of projects on Ravelry, but I hadn't seen it before, and I think it's such a fun and playful zigzag motif. It's worked top down, and the texture is achieved with just knits and purls. The finished bust ranges from 36 to 58 inches with 2 to 4 inches of positive ease, and it's worked with a worsted weight yarn on 4 millimeter needles or needles needed to meet a gauge of 20 by 32. Next up we have the Staffen by Rebecca Clow, and this is I think one of her newer releases, and the pattern includes options for a sweater, a cardigan, or a vest, and I believe v-neck or round neck, or maybe just round neck. But in any case, there is a vest option included, but you also, for that amount of money, get sweater and cardigan options too. And there are interesting stripes of texture and ribbing, and it's worked top down in the round. The finished bust ranges from 35.5 to 71 inches with 3 to 8 inches of positive ease recommended, so quite a wide range. It calls for a worsted weight yarn on 5 millimeter needles, so a 16 by 26 gauge, a little bit of an open gauge, which I think is nice because obviously the denser the fabric, the warmer it's going to be, which can be very nice, but then I think when something's not quite as warm, it makes it more versatile. You can wear it layered for colder weather, but you can also wear it in a bit warmer weather and get away with it too. And then last vest for this category is the Wild Winds vest by Maria Susmilch. And it's half fisherman's rib with a round neck and really cool increases in shaping around the neck. The finished bust ranges from 33 to 63 inches with 2 to 3 inches of positive ease, and it holds a DK plus lace weight or worsted weight on 4 millimeter needles for a 17 by 36 gauge in that half fisherman's rib. This one I think is quite classic, and the rib just adds a bit of visual interest. Now we are getting into the cables for DK and worsted weight. So first up we have the Augustine's cable number 1 by Anne-Sophie Velling. This is a high neck, somewhat fitted slipover with pretty complex cable motifs. It looks like it would be a really engaging project with a beautiful, elegant result. It's worked bottom up. And so with these cables, I could see it being really potato chippy, like you just get sucked in, but I also could see it being a little bit tedious and maybe being one that you'd want to, work on for a bit, take some time away, come back to it, depending on what your kind of approach to projects is. This project has finished bust measurements ranging from 35.5 to 63 inches with 4 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a light DK plus lace weight on 4mm needles for a 24 by 30 gauge. This next one is really interesting. I've never seen such a wide cable, and this is the Cable V-neck sweater vest by Georgia Jago, and I find the really wide, bold cables quite interesting. There are stripes of, I think, garter stitch in between and chunky ribbing on the bottom. Personally, I feel like my mom might like this pattern, which is part of why I included it as well. I wouldn't say it's necessarily in my personal style, but I could see this really fitting into either a more like neutral classic style or kind of like a streetwear style, depending on how you wear it. It is worked bottom up flat and seamed, which I think makes sense. It would give a bit of structure to this quite wide cable sweater and prevent it hopefully from sagging over time. And it fits a bust of 28 to 50 inches with a DK weight on 5mm needles and a 19.5 by 25 gauge. Here we have another Thea Coleman pattern, the Cherry Rumble vest, and this is a round neck cropped vest with this beautiful cable and lace motif just at the bottom of the body, and there are options to incorporate this texture on the body or incorporate color blocking or just leave it quite simple, and I think that's nice to have that versatility and that opportunity to personalize it. The finished bust ranges from 36 to 68 inches with 3 to 5 inches of positive ease recommended with a DK weight yarn. And I haven't put the needle size. It might mean it doesn't list suggested needles. If it does, I'll put it here. The gauge is 20 by 28. Here we have the Current by Martin Story. This is a beautiful classic V-neck vest with a plain back and then this bold cable motif on the front, including rope cables, diamond, and lattice cables. The finished bust ranges from 34 to 66 inches with 4 to 6 inches of positive ease recommended and a DK weight yarn with a gauge of 22 by 30. Here we have the Ebba vest by Sari Nordland. I'm including this in the cable section, but it actually is a lace motif that imitates cables, but I think the appearance is like very reminiscent of cables. It is worked top down in the round with a small V-neck, and it has 1x1 ripped edges. The finished bust ranges from 34 to 65 inches with 4 to 5 inches of positive ease recommended. It calls for a DK weight or fingering plus mohair on 3.25mm needles for a 20 by 29 gauge. And then next up we have the Fresno round neck vest by Magdalena Parker. This is a beautiful braided cable vest alternating with reverse stockinette, and the round neck has folded ribbing on the neckband. I think this one looks so beautiful. It's very classic. Oh my goodness. I don't know if you guys can hear, there's a little commotion outside. Yeah, I just feel like there's a lot of dimensionality. Like the cables look very like 3D and bold, but they're very classic. It is kind of simple yet striking. I really enjoy this one. And the finished bust ranges from 31.5 to 63 inches with 2 inches plus of positive ease recommended. It calls for a fingering plus lace weight or DK weight on 4mm needles, and the gauge is 28 by 35. Here we have another, I would say, pretty classic design. This is the Ginger vest by Dorothea Fissiers again. This is a cabled vest with round neck and open sides, so that's an interesting aspect. The project is worked flat bottom up from the back and then over the top, and then the sides are seamed at the end. The finished bust ranges from 29 to 61 inches with 2 to 3 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a sport weight plus lace weight or a DK knit on 4mm needles with a 27 by 28 gauge. Here we have another Sari Nordland pattern. This is the Mila vest. I really like this one. There's these beautiful, complex but repetitive cables with a very classy double knit button band and V-neck, and it's worked top down seamless. I think there are like two almost categories of cables that I think about. One is more repetitive and then one is more like mixed up. And this one obviously is quite repetitive, which I think creates like a really beautiful and intricate result without being like too in your face. So I really like this one. The finished bust ranges from 28 to 58 inches with 0 to 2 inches of negative ease recommended, so a little bit tighter fitting actually. And I could imagine wearing this one as just a shirt, as she does in the sample photo, or wearing it over a dress or over something else layered for the cooler months. It calls for a light fingering yarn held double or DK with a 25 by 28 gauge. Here we have another petite knit option. This is the Moby Slipover. So again, it's the slipover version of a quite well-known sweater pattern, which is this crosshatch panel with some rope cables. It's kind of like a boxy fit, and I think it's pretty classic, but also fun, and it could be dressed up or down, and it's worked top down in the round. The finished bust ranges from 38 to 62 inches with 4 to 6 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a DK weight or a fingering plus mohair on 3.5 millimeter needles, so a little bit, and the gauge is 24 by 30, so a little bit finer than some of the ones we've been talking about. Here we have another option that could be worn, I think, as a shirt or as a layering piece. This is the Terra Top by loveknit.nl. This includes horseshoe and rope cables down the middle of the front and back with a pretty high round neck, and it's worked bottom up in the round. The finished bust ranges from 29 to 51.5 inches with 0.5 inch to 3.5 inches of negative ease recommended. So this is a tighter fitting one as well. It is worked with a worsted weight yarn on 4 millimeter needles with a 22 by 28 gauge. Here we have, this is a vest adaptation of a really well-known sweater. This is the Tulip Loop Vest by Other Loops. And it's a v-neck with kind of these ascending tulip cables and stripes. And there's cool shaping around the neck. And there's this kind of oversized slouchy fit. However, there's limited sizing. The finished bust ranges from 42.5 to 51 inches with 7 to 10 inches of positive ease recommended. So I do think that's quite limited. I just did want to include this because I think it is a really pretty pattern and it's kind of the companion to a quite well-known sweater. I do hope also that if this pattern gets more attention, maybe the designer would consider including a better size range. It calls for a DK plus lace weight or a worsted weight on 4.5 millimeter needles with an 18 by 28 gauge. Now we are going into colorwork. So the first one here is a stripe colorwork. This is the Alex Slipover by Nicolene Sophie Knit. It has a high round neck. It's almost verging on a mock neck, like it's really high up. And it is, I think, really cute and classic fit with ribbed edging and these blocky stripes. The finished bust ranges from 37 to 55.5 inches with 6 to 8 inches of positive ease recommended. It calls for a DK or fingering plus lace weight on 4 millimeter needles with a 17 by 22 gauge. Next up we have the Alma Slipover by Susanna Karttunen. And this is, I think, a really cute, like kind of Christmassy vest with a colorwork motif around the lower body and striped ribbed edges. There's kind of like a mild, like small v-neck, and this is worked bottom up in the round. The finished bust ranges from 31.5 to 67 inches with 1 to 3 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a DK weight on 4.5 millimeter needles for a 20 by 26 gauge. Here we have another one of my favorites. This is the Anjou Slipover by Skinny Dipping, and it is a beautiful mosaic colorwork. It creates kind of a plaid effect, and you can use 2 plain colors or use an ombre contrast color for a rainbow effect. I think if I were to make this, I probably would try to imitate the effect achieved, which is with a Noro yarn, and find an ombre contrast color. There's a pretty low-cut v-neck, and it can be made with or without buttons with 2x2 rib edges, and it's worked top down. The finished bust ranges from 34 to 68 inches with 3 to 5 inches of positive ease recommended, and it's worked with worsted weight on 5 millimeter needles for an 18 by 36 gauge in the mosaic colorwork. Here we have another Martin Story pattern, the Bodkin, and this is Fair Isle stranded colorwork, a v-neck fitted vest, and it's worked bottom up flat and seamed. It fits a bust of 28 to 62 inches with 2 to 4 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a DK weight yarn on 3.75 millimeter needles for a 25.5 by 27 gauge. So it is a bit of a denser gauge, I would say, and with stranded colorwork that's also adding heft to the fabric. So this probably would be a bit of a warmer vest. I really love this next one as well. This is the Checkered Vest by Andrea Gahn. It's a super cute, pretty large checkers using intarsia colorwork only on the front, and then the back is plain, but I think you could adapt it to have the checkers on the back as well. Personally, I would probably do that if I were to make this pattern as a v-neck with 1x1 ribbed edges. And you can use 2 colors as in the sample photo, but I think some of the examples also use more colors, which is really fun. It could be a good scrap yarn project. And this fits a bust of 30 to 66 inches with 4 inches positive ease recommended. Great size range. It calls for a worsted weight on 4.5 millimeter needles and an 18 by 26 gauge. And this next one is like really unique. So this is the Peary Plaid Vest by Sharon Barnes. It's available for free on the designer's website, and it includes this all-over plaid that's described as deceptively easy to knit using mosaic colorwork, and it is made in one piece with a flat construction. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense. I think it might be the front and back are each made in one piece and then flat, and then it's seamed, but I'm not quite sure about that. In any case, the finished bust ranges from 33 to 66 inches with 0 to 6 inches of positive ease recommended, depending on the desired fit, and it calls for a DK weight on 4 millimeter needles to hit a gauge of 22 by 32. Here we have another stripy one. This is the See My Vest Worsted by Emily Baudouin. This is a round neck, pretty classic vest with a relaxed fit and 1x1 ribbed edges, and there's options for plain or stripes. I put it in the colorwork section because I think the stripes and the color blocked ribbing are really fun. The finished bust ranges from 30 to 61.5 inches with 0 to 2 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a worsted weight on 4.5 millimeter needles for an 18 by 25 gauge. And then last one in this category is the Sivan by Jennifer Brow. This is, I think, a really cool color work, wavy, almost like a Rorschach test. I found this like really interesting and unique. The finished bust ranges from 34.5 to 66.5 inches with 6 to 9 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a DK weight with a 19 by 24 gauge. Now we are moving into Aran and bulky weight. So I'm going to start off as before with a few stockinette options. First up is the Heartwarmer Vest by Dorothy Officiers. I really love this one. I would say this is one that I'm definitely considering making. It is a turtleneck with 1x1 ribbed edges. I think it's so cute. It would be like for business casual with slacks or a skirt, or for casual settings to lay over a long sleeve shirt or a dress, and it's worked in the round top down. The finished bust ranges from 33 to 64.5 inches with 3 to 4 inches of positive ease recommended, and it's worked with a worsted plus lace weight on 5 millimeter needles. You could also use an Aran weight, but for this one, for some reason, I just love the fuzzy mohair look. I would definitely do the worsted plus lace weight, and the gauge is 16 by 23. This is actually another one of my favorites. This is a really great little section here. This is the Peony Vest by Annie Germain, and this is kind of reminiscent of the Clematis vest, but there's like even more going on with the button band. I'm obsessed with this like squiggly button band, which is actually functional, like it actually unbuttons, and this is worked flat from the top down with 1x1 ribbed edges. I really like the appearance of this one. I also love the yarn that was chosen, like the slight marling. Everything about this I just love. I really want to work on this, and I think it would be so cute with little like flower buttons. The finished bust ranges from 32 to 63 inches with 2 to 4 inches of positive ease recommended. It calls for a bulky weight yarn on 6 millimeter needles and a 14 by 20 gauge, so would work up pretty quickly. And I forget what the recommended yarn is, but I could imagine it being something with like a cotton content as well to make it a little bit more wearable across seasons. Next up we have the Plug and Play Slipover by Pairs Well with Knitting. This is kind of a chunky stockinette with interesting side details and some nice shaping at the neck. It seems cozy and fun and pretty classic, and the sizing fits a 35.5 to 55 inch bust using bulky weight yarn for a gauge of 14 by 18. Next up we have a couple, I think, pretty well-known petite knit patterns, but I thought I would be remiss to not include them. So the first one is the Terrazzo Slipover. I think this one is really beautiful and classic. It looks, again, kind of like something that you could buy in a store, but in the best way. It has at least how she has recommended it, a long fit with a split hem and twisted rib edging. Again, you could adapt any of those things if you wanted to. And it's worked top down in the round, which we love. The finished bust ranges from 39 to 64 inches, with around 5 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for an Aran weight or a worsted plus mohair. The gauge is 17 by 27. And then lastly for this section, we have the zipper slipover, also by Stockinette. I think this might be the only one in the video with a zipper, which is a really fun take on a slipover or vest. And it has quite a high and cozy neck, but then a slightly oversized fit and kind of like deep armholes. I think if I were to try to make it, I might want to try to make some modifications to make the neck maybe a little shorter. I get a little claustrophobic when a turtleneck, like I would want it to hit like a little lower. And then I also would probably want the armholes to end like a little higher. So something to think about, but of course for you, do whatever you would want for this pattern. It does look really cozy and warm and simple, but also kind of bold due to some of those design elements like the zipper. The finished bust ranges from 42.5 to 68 inches, with around 10 inches of positive ease recommended, so quite oversized. It's worsted plus lace weight or a bulky weight on 5mm needles and a 15 by 24 gauge. Now we are getting into texture ribbing lace for the Aran and bulky weight category, which only has a few options. The first is the Dormise vest by Homebody Hand Knits. I think this is a really cool like ribbing and texture. The ribbing contains stripes of knits like stockinette, and then like cedar moss stitch instead of the reverse stockinette. It's worked top down with a European shoulder construction, which I think looks really polished and adds a nice detail. And then it has a round neck with 1x1 ribbed edging. The sizes fit a bust of 32 to 50 inches, and it calls for a worsted plus lace weight or Aran weight on 5mm needles for a 16 by 24 gauge. Next up, I would say this one is also one of my absolute favorites. I think it looks so cute and so gorgeous. This is the Limford vest by Norkel Studio. So cute. These all over faux cables with I-cord edging and these bow ties in the middle, and also some kind of gentle v-neck shaping like a sloped neckline. It's worked top down, and it is tagged as seamed on Ravelry, but it's not specific in the description. And I was looking at the photos, and it was a little hard to tell if it's actually seamed, so that would mean that it's probably worked in 3 pieces, the back and then the 2 front panels. But I could also imagine it being worked flat for the back, put on hold, front part, put on hold, second front part, and then join it all to work flat back and forth for the lower body. I'm not quite sure. In any case, the finished bust is kind of limited. It ranges from 34 to 43 inches with 2 to 4 inches of positive ease recommended. So that is something that I think is not as great about this pattern, but I did think it was so cute. I wanted to include it. And if it is something that piques your interest, you could look out and see if there's any there's some stylistically similar vests that I have included in this video with like the tie front or like bow details, feminine details. But I just really love those faux cables, so I did want to include this one just in case it would work for any of you watching. It calls for a bulky weight yarn on 5mm needles and a 16 by 25 gauge. Last textured vest here is the Pearl Texture Vest by Natalia Ledvanova. And this is an all-over double seed stitch with 1x1 ribbed edging, a round neck, and a quite oversized fit. And it's worked bottom up flat and then seamed. I think for something like double seed stitch, it doesn't make a difference if you work it flat or in the round, because either way you're like doing basically 2x2 ribbing, I believe, in a sense. Like you're doing 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls, and then swapping a couple of rows later. And so in that case, the seamed nature would maybe help it hold its structure a bit better. The finished bust ranges from 43 to 62 inches with 7 to 11 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a worsted or Aran weight yarn on 4.5mm needles with a 17 by 28 gauge. Now we're getting into the cable patterns. The first one is called the Hilda by Vera Valimaki. And this is a round neck with a beautiful chunky cable motif. There's horseshoe cables, basic rope cables, panels of moss stitch, and then there's 1x1 ribbed edges. The finished bust has a great range. It ranges from 32 to 64 inches with 2 to 4 inches of positive ease recommended. The pattern calls for an Aran weight yarn on 6mm needles with an 18 by 24 gauge. Next we have the Libra vest by Would You Knit Design. This is a v-neck with a very slouchy fit. I think a really interesting cable motif, and then these color blocked ribbing across the neckline and the armbands, and it's worked top down in the round. The finished bust is again pretty limited. It ranges only from 43 to 52.5 inches. And this pattern calls for an Aran weight on 4.5mm needles, so pretty tight knit with an 18x26 gauge. Here we have the Luna vest by, I don't know how to pronounce this, Hinmer Design. It has quite chunky cables, a mock neck, which maybe could be adapted to be less tight, like that looks a little uncomfortable. And I just think it's a really fun, bold cable motif with then twisted rib neckband and hem. Finished bust is pretty expansive, ranges from 43 to 73 inches with 8 inches of positive ease recommended. And calls for a DK weight yarn held double or just an Aran weight with a 13x16 gauge. I think, despite the cables, that could work up relatively quickly just in terms of the gauge. We also have the Morning Mist vest by Wool Addicts. This is a really cool kind of like squiggly cable motif, and it's worked bottom up flat with buttons. The finished bust ranges from 38.5 to 49 inches with bulky yarn on 7mm needles for an 18x20 gauge. This next one is called Rocco by Liz Smith, and I would say this might be another one of my favorites. It's a really interesting cable motif. I would say it's probably a pretty stiff fabric due to the bulky yarn and tight gauge. That's my only concern, but I really like the complexity of the cables. And in terms of the construction, it's worked flat and seamed. The finished bust ranges from 36.5 to 75 inches with 6 to 10 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for a bulky weight yarn with a 15.5x22 gauge. Next up we have a really cute one. This is the Terrace Slipover by, again, loveknit.nl. This is a pretty cropped slipover with a round neck, and it interestingly uses stockinette and a stretchy bind off for the neckband and armhole edging, which is pretty unique, and I think it contributes to a kind of like feminine, delicate look as opposed to ribbing. It has this cute cable motif down the middle of the front and back, and it's worked bottom up in the round. It includes sizes of extra small to 3XL, but the measurements are not specified. And what is interesting and kind of unique about this is it uses 2 strands of mohair on 6mm needles. So I would say that brings us into like an Aran vibe, but it is not using like an Aran weight yarn. It's using 2 strands of mohair. So for a very like open, fluffy fabric with a 16x22 gauge. Here we have the Twisted Tank by Eleanor Alice. This is a round neck slipover with cable and texture motifs and twisted rib edges. It fits a bust of 28 to 62 inches with 3 to 4 inches of positive ease, and it calls for a sport weight held double or an Aran weight on 4mm needles, so that'd be quite dense, and the gauge is 22x28. And now we are getting into our last category, which is Aran and bulky color work. We have some really fun patterns in this section. The first one is called the Bliss Vest by Irene Lynn. This is a kind of oversized drapey v-neck vest with a bold graphic colorwork motif at the bottom of the body. I think the colors that she's chosen are really interesting, how there's this neutral background and then quite vibrant, kind of bold colors, but of course you could change it up to fit your style. And the finished bust ranges from 44 to 61 inches with variable ease depending on your desired fit. The sample photo uses 11 inches of positive ease, so quite oversized. Of course, you could also make it smaller and more fitted if that fits your style and how you're imagining wearing it. It uses a bulky weight yarn, but it's a fluffy, blown yarn, which I think contributes to the drapiness. And the gauge is 18x23. Next, we have another pattern by Skinny Dipping. I think her colorwork and like mosaic colorwork is so cool. This is the Bolo Slipover, which is lattice colorwork, and it's worked top down seamless with a round neck. The finished bust ranges from 35 to 72.5 inches with 2 to 8 inches of positive ease recommended, depending on what kind of fit you want. It calls for a super bulky weight for the base and then a bulky weight for the lattice contrast color. And you can see that she has chosen an ombre color for the lattice, which looks really cool, but of course you could choose a solid color, and I think that would look nice as well, especially if you chose kind of like a bold contrast, maybe like a neutral base, and then like a much darker or much lighter or just very bright contrast color. It could be really fun. The gauge is 10x24 because of the like slip stitches for the lattice. Next up we have, I believe, the Kala vest by Joanna Garish. I've talked about this designer before on my channel. I love the look of her patterns. I think they're so beautiful. But I've only tried one and it had a number of mistakes in it. And in previous videos, I've heard from people in the comments that her patterns tend to have mistakes. I think this is one of her newer patterns, so I'm hoping that it's better, but pretty soon I'm planning to try one of her newer patterns and see how the accuracy is. I just wanted to put a little disclaimer. I do think this vest looks really cool and I love the appearance of it. It's such a fun plaid v-neck with buttons down the front, 1x1 twisted rib edges, and I believe it would be worked up with stripes and then maybe going back with a crochet hook to add those vertical stripes, but I'm not 100% sure. But I love the finished appearance. It has a finished bust of 39 to 65 inches with 6 to 8 inches of positive ease recommended. And it calls for a lace weight yarn held triple on 5.5 millimeter needles for a 15 by 24 gauge. Next up we have the Diamond vest by Olga Jankelovich. And this is a somewhat fitted v-neck with this really cool concentric diamond pattern. It is supposedly worked flat and seamed, but I feel like it would make more sense to, and probably be easy to adapt it to be worked in the round, at least for the body, and then only have to work flat above the armholes or even like incorporate steeking. The size range is pretty limited. There are 3 sizes with a finished bust of 36, 45, or 54 inches. It uses Aran weight yarn on 3.75 millimeter needles, which seems very dense, and the recommended gauge is 24 by 24. Next we have the Dotted Plus by Chiaki Hayashi. This is a really cute classic shape v-neck vest with kind of these dotted stripes and then color block ribbing at the bottom of the body. So I really like this. I think you could do a lot of fun things with the color. Of course, you could do all the stripes in the same color as I believe it is in the sample, or you could do different colored stripes and make it a little bit scrappy. So I think that's really fun. And you could also even change up the stockinette color in between the different stripes. This has a finished bust of 39.5 to 53 inches, and it calls for a DK weight yarn doubled or bulky weight on 6 millimeter needles for a 14 by 21 gauge. I think it would work up pretty quickly. Next we have a really fun stranded color work, which is the Freya Fair Isle tank top by Birch and Bliss. It's a round neck, slightly slouchy, all over stranded color work with a diamond motif. It fits a bust of 28 to 62 inches and calls for an Aran weight on 5 millimeter needles for an 18 by 24 gauge. We only have a few more options here. Sirens, classic New York. Alright, this is another one that I have included in a previous video, I think, but I really love it, so I wanted to mention it again. This is the Outside the Box vest by Clara Nilsson. It's a really cool graphic color work incorporating cables, and it's knit bottom up in the round before splitting at the armholes. It has a round neck and 2x2 ribbed edges, and I just think it looks so beautiful. I really love the fun and bright and bold colors in the sample, but you could also, of course, adapt it and make it a lot more muted. But I just think that combination of color work and cables is so engaging. It has a 27.5 to 55 inch bust with neutral ease recommended, so it's like a fitted appearance. And it calls for Aran weight on 5 millimeter needles for a 27.5 by 24 gauge. Next up we have the Trollebackarna by Sana Bjerregard. This is, I think, another really cool graphic or maybe like tribal inspired colorwork motif. You can do it in just 2 colors, or as the sample shows, you could use more colors, like up to 5 or maybe even more than that. I think this could be a good scrap yarn project. It's a free pattern, and it's worked bottom up with the body in the round, and then front and back are worked flat above the armholes. And the edges are done in twisted rib folded over. The finished bust ranges from 38 to 57 inches with 4 to 6 inches of positive ease recommended, and it calls for an Aran weight on 5 millimeter needles for a 20 by 22 gauge. And then our last pattern is the Twin Peaks by Rosemary Drysdale. This is a round neck, slightly boxy vest with this zigzag stranded colorwork motif. Again, could be a good scrap yarn project. It's kind of hard to tell the constructions. It implies it might be worked flat and seamed, which seems odd for an all-over stranded colorwork, but I think you could adapt it to maybe be mostly in the round. The finished bust is ranging from 39.5 to 61 inches, and it calls for an Aran weight on 6 millimeter needles for an 18 by 19 gauge. We made it through to the end. This was certainly a long video and took a lot of research and a lot of work, but I really hope that you gain inspiration from it. I know I certainly have. I'm feeling really excited about vests, and I have a few on my queue, and I'm sure I will, have more in the future. I love being able to come back to that bundle in my favorites and just look through and have it categorized by the different weights and the different kind of motifs. So I am definitely feeling excited about some of the texture, some of the color work, especially some of those scrappy projects. And I would love to hear in the comments again what is feeling inspiring to you. And also, do you have a favorite vest pattern that I have not included in this video? I would love to know. So if you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll consider subscribing to see future pattern inspiration videos, as well as maybe watch my own podcast and knitting journey if you're interested. And thank you again. I will see you next time. Bye.